Tony Liebert's joining me now, covers Minnesota like few reporters can. And I know that there's a rabid fan base, Tony, that follows this team. Thanks for being with me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Good. Let's start with the offensive side of the ball. Some questions around the passing game, I think. What does Minnesota need to do to make some significant improvements to the passing game for this upcoming season?
Well, in my opinion, I think they have all of the personnel to be successful in that area, and it's more of just a execution and a game plan issue. Last year, their passing game seemed to be very predictable under former offensive coordinator Mike Sanford Jr., and then PJ Fleck and the Gopher staff clearly noticed that there was an issue, and he went out to go hire his former offensive coordinator and coach that worked with Tanner Morgan in 2019, one of his biggest seasons of his career, Kirk Ciarrocca. And now it's really up to Ciarrocca and the rest of the passing game staff to see if they can correct the issues that they had last season.
How valuable do you think that past relationship will be moving forward, just from a chemistry standpoint, kind of resetting things here? You mentioned the coaching changes. Does this really matter?
Yeah, I think so. Tanner Morgan clearly seemed, I guess, more comfortable in 2019 when Ciarrocca was calling the plays. And really, since then, when Ciarrocca moved on, he really hasn't been able to find that same rhythm that he had in that one great season. That also could do a little bit with personnel. He had Tyler Johnson and Rashad Bateman, who are now two NFL wide receivers. But I believe that the wide receiver room is just as talented. They just need to, I guess, execute. And I think that relationship that he had with Ciarrocca is something that is shown, I guess, to at least help him, hopefully, in the future.
As it relates to Tanner Morgan specifically, Tony, it seems like his feet have gotten him into trouble at certain points in the pocket in his career. And whether that's a mobility issue or not having the kind of protection that he needs, or maybe just bad decision making. I mean, is there anything that you've seen throughout the offseason or anywhere else that leads you to believe that those are some issues that might be corrected coming into this season?
Well, I think at least hopefully Tanner would be the first to admit that he's not an ultra athletic quarterback. So I think having a game plan that puts him in situations to succeed as a quarterback that relies more on his decision-making would help him dramatically. The last two seasons under Mike Sanford, I don't think he was really put in that many favorable positions as a quarterback. And in that 2019 season, it just looked like everything was clicking for him, just decision-making wise, and even just physically. Like, he didn't look like he was, I guess, even trying as hard as he was the last 2 years. So I think the biggest thing is just putting him in situations that he can succeed, because he might not have those physical tools as other quarterbacks to work out of the pocket and work when the play breaks down. So just keeping him in the right situations, in the right frame of mind, I think would be what helps him succeed the most.
And so much of this has to do with the offensive line. So much of success in college football, and really at any level of football, has to do with what happens between the trenches. And there's been so much movement. You had this veteran group of offensive linemen who have left now, with the exception of a few positions. I mean, how would you summarize what we're going to see with the offensive line with this team, and how much chemistry we'll potentially see before Big Ten play begins?
Yeah, definitely. PJ Fleck, I guess, kind of made it one of his goals to get the Gophers offensive line back into a spot where they have multiple guys get drafted or go to the NFL every season. And last year we saw Daniel Falele get drafted early, and Sam Schluter and Blaze Andrews both landed on NFL teams. And I think this year they have the same level of talent as they did last year. It's just they haven't played as much together as that group did last season. You have Quinn Carroll coming, transfer from Notre Dame, Edina High School, hometown kid. One could be the most talented player for that unit this season. But you also have John Michael Schmitz, who might be one of the best offensive linemen in the country. Early Bremerton Center of the Year award watch list. maybe even favorite, some people are saying. He could hear his name called early. And then you also add Ariante Irsay, who's a talented underclassman getting his first season, likely to start for the Gophers. And in the middle, you also have at the guard positions Chuck Filiaga from Michigan transfer, and then Axel Rushmeyer, who was kind of their swing sixth lineman the past few seasons, now gets a shot at a starting role.
And so it's a new group, Tony, but it's not necessarily a young group. It's not necessarily an inexperienced group. And I guess that is an important point of distinction when you talk about a new group of offensive linemen coming together and being tasked with really an important job right out of the gate, making sure that Morgan is comfortable if they're going to have success this season.
Yeah. I played offensive line in high school and growing up in football. And the biggest thing that I've learned with success, I guess, at that position, because it's harder for a casual football fan or someone who didn't play football to know what separates a good offensive line from a bad offensive line. And I think you really have to have all five guys working together. And no matter how much talent you have individually, it might not really help unless all five guys are working as one. And I feel like that's the biggest, I guess, even position group on the football field, that all five of your offensive linemen have to have a good relationship even off the field, and they have to know each other's strengths and weaknesses. And I mean, there's a lot of moving parts heading into this year, so it's hard to tell if they do. But offensive lineman coach Brian Callahan has shown that he can develop that group, and I don't think there's a reason to think why he can't heading into this year.
And as it relates to some of the skill positions, wide receiver position, that sort of thing, you saw a lot of dropped passes. And, when you have a quarterback like Tanner Morgan, who doesn't necessarily throw the ball maybe as much as some other quarterbacks that we see, but when he does, there's no security in terms of pass catching. How big of a problem is that? And is that something that you think is going to be a priority heading into next season offensively?
Yeah. So I'm higher on the Gophers group of pass catchers than most. Chris Ottman-Bell has shown that he can be an elite option, and I think there's no issues with that. He dealt with some injuries last year, but he should be in line for a big year this year. But Dalen Wright, who's now going to be a redshirt junior, I believe, transferred in from Texas A&M. Played well in a few big games last year. I'm very high on him. I think he could be a very talented player. But he also dealt with some drops last year. And then you also have Daniel Jackson and Mike Brown-Stevens. They have four very, very talented wide receivers. Again, it's all about just bringing it together, because I think all four of them had missed opportunities with those drops, which add up. It's a frustrating thing for an offense to continue to have rhythm when you have simple mistakes like that. But another year with, I guess, your top four options, again, they're going to have another year to build chemistry, and I think it can only be better than what we saw last year.
And on the defensive side of the ball, I know you, when we spoke previously before this interview began, spotlighted the defensive line. What's the story there, and why is that a point of emphasis?
Yeah, it was the strength of the Gophers defense last year, I really think. You had Boye Mafe, who might have been one of the best players on the team, hear his name called early in the NFL draft. On the interior, you had guys like Niles Pinckney and Micah Treadway, and then Osezi Otomiwo, who got drafted by hometown Vikings late in the third round, or in the third day of the NFL draft. So they have to replace a lot, but they have a lot of talent and youth on that up front on the defensive line. With Thomas Rush is probably going to be the veteran leader, guy who's been very productive throughout his career, coming back for his sixth season. And then you got on the interior guys like Trill Carter, who could have a monster year. Hear his name called pretty early next NFL draft. And then on the outside again, you have Ja Joyner, who has the potential to be a breakout player for this team. And then two transfers, Lorenzo Surgers, edge defender from Vanderbilt, and Kyler Baugh, interior guy from Houston Baptist. So it's an interesting position group to watch, because they are replacing their defensive line coach, Chad Wilt, as well, who's now at Indiana, with Brick Haley, who's been a long time college football coach, 30 plus years, I believe. So it'll definitely be an interesting unit to watch on the defense.
So to have a unit that is so retooled when they were so reliable with some of those veterans that you've mentioned that are no longer here, when you look at some of the new pieces that they're adding, which player out of that group that you highlighted might really surprise some people or be ready to deliver faster than some might expect?
It's got to be, I think, Trill Carter and Jaw Joyner. I think most diehard Gophers fans have heard those names before. They're guys who have made flashy plays before. But both of those guys, their ceiling, I think, is limitless. They both could be early day one or day two picks. I think they're that talented of players. And I think if they're able to play up to their potential, that'll be what can take this Gophers defense to a really solid unit to one of the best in the conference, if not the country, like we saw last year.
And I know a lot of people are asking, preseason, is it possible to win the Big Ten West? What's the overall record projection? What do you expect from this team this year?
So I just went through it the other day on my social channels, and I think if I had to give out a guess right now, I think 9-3 is a realistic prediction. They have a pretty easy non-conference slate, so they could start out the year pretty hot. And then they have a big game with Michigan State on the road early, which is going to be tough. They have a game in the middle of the year on the road at Penn State, which is going to be tough. And then they close the year with Iowa at home and then Wisconsin on the road. So out of those 4 games, you obviously have a few trap games in there with Nebraska and Rutgers, schools like that. But like those are going to be their 4 biggest games. And if they can get out winning 2, even just one of those games, I think they could be sitting in a pretty good spot. And 2 of those, Michigan State and Penn State, are Big Ten East teams. So in my eyes, they're going to be right in the thick of the battle for the Big Ten West. I think it's going to come down to the end of the year. It's going to come down between Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa. And when the Gophers play 2 of them in their last 2 games, I think they're going to control their own destiny for most of the season.
I know on your social channels, you did point to that Iowa game as probably the most pivotal in terms of everything sort of coming down to this, the game that will not necessarily make or break things, but will ultimately be the determining factor. How much have you seen of what they're going to bring? How much have you been able to scout, the other teams that are on the schedule to try to get a sense of whether 9-3 is actually pretty realistic or maybe a little aspirational?
Yeah. The Big Ten West specifically is a really interesting division because really the Gophers, Iowa, and Wisconsin are all going to be defensive-oriented teams that have question marks on offense. They're all returning quarterbacks that have played before in the Big Ten and started, but who have all 3 teams and 3 quarterbacks struggled in the Big Ten. It's really going to come down, I think, to whichever one of those 3 offenses play better. I think Iowa nationally has more recognizable defense. They return a lot of guys they had from last season where they were ranked as high as number 2 in the country. Wisconsin replaces a bunch of guys on defense. I could see them having a little bit of a drop-off from what they're normally slated at. But again, I think it comes down to which one of those 3 teams are going to step up offensively. And in my opinion, I think the Gophers have the most talent, at least, on the offensive side of the ball. So that's why I think they have a leg up on Iowa and Wisconsin in my eyes.
And to me, when I hear you kind of describe the defensive forward teams that they might face, especially in critical situations on the calendar, I go back to the offensive line and I think, man, whether or not these guys can gel together and offer Tanner Morgan the protection that he needs to continue to develop, to maybe work on his mobility or to find, those skill players, those receivers that you mentioned that you have a lot of faith in. To me, it feels like a lot of it hinges on that. I mean, when you talk to fans heading into the season, what are some of the biggest question marks that they have? What are the things that they're really thinking about? Is it about that new core that's going to be kind of tasked with protecting Tanner Morgan? Is it about the coaching changes that we've seen take effect with the team? What do the fans care about heading into the year?
So like you mentioned, offensive line, get into those late games, late in the Big Ten season when it's cold and it's snowing out, that's what wins you football games. So I would definitely agree with that. That is a major factor heading into the year. But as for the fans, they love to talk about Tanner Morgan. If he's taking that next step, he's been the quarterback as long as PJ Fleck's been here, it seems like. So it's a guy Gophers fans have definitely, I guess, grown to love, grown to hate, whatever you would want to say. But he's definitely at the top of the conversation. Is he going to be able to find that 2019 self? Or is it going to continue to struggle? Is Kirk Shiraka going to help him that much at the offensive coordinator role? Like we highlighted, the Iowa game is going to be a massive, I think, point of the season. It's kind of PJ Fleck's missing piece that he's had in his rebuild of this program. He's beaten Wisconsin twice. He's competed in the Big Ten West at least closely almost every single year that he's been here. And he's just that Iowa getting the Floyd of Rosedale back has just been eluding him. So if he can get that done, and Tanner Morgan and Shiraka are able to build some chemistry that they had in 2019, we could be looking at a pretty solid turnaround for this Gophers team.
It's funny to talk about Tanner Morgan taking the next step. As you so aptly remind me, he is a 6-year signal caller. So he's been in the program for quite a long time. And I imagine that's why he's so polarizing to many fans. I think you're probably on one side of the camp or the other, but either way, it's time for him to prove and for the coaching staff to prove that they've got the pieces in place. Thank you so much, Tony. Great preview for the season. We appreciate it. Best of luck to you. I know you're diehard. Before we let you go, just tell people where they can find you, especially if they're watching this. I imagine they love Minnesota.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. You can follow me on Twitter at Tony Liebert. That is Tony with a Y and then Liebert. And then, you can pretty much find everything on there. That's kind of my hub for everything. So, yeah, I appreciate you having me on. Always fun to talk Gophers football.
Thanks, Tony.